With us is COVID-19 Watch. It's a Friday edition, and we are taking a look at the impact of the pandemic on the manufacturing and agricultural sectors in Nigeria. We have joining us via Skype the acting Director General of the Manufacturers Association of Nigeria, Ambrose. Oruche. Thank you so much for finding time to join us, DG.
Thank you for inviting us, and I want to welcome the viewers to this program.
You are most welcome. We also have joining us in the studio to take a look at the agric sector, the impact on the agric sector, Dr. Tony Bello. Dr. Bello is an agricultural expert. Thank you so much for joining us. All right, so together we'll be looking at the two related sectors. The manufacturing sector, of course, depends to a very large extent on the agricultural sector. And we will be looking at how the COVID-19 pandemic has impacted on these two sectors. Let's begin with you, Mr. Oruche. Tell us how the manufacturing sector has fared so far, both during and after the lockdown.
Okay, let me start by this way. We all are aware that the COVID-19 pandemic took everyone unawares. No one prepared for this, even the global economy. So it was unexpected disruption in the way we do business. The manufacturers was hit by this pandemic because before the lockdown, there was supply disruption in terms of raw materials, value chain disruption. Most of the manufacturers could not access the raw materials, especially the ones being imported from Asia, Europe, because everyone became trying to restrict export of major raw materials. So manufacturers began to experience the negative impact of COVID before the entire nation were impacted. As you noted from our survey, we had an unsold inventory of 420 billion at the first quarter. That was as a result of the disruptions impacted the economy. You know, in terms of the consumers, we are not able to purchase the products, you know, and even before the lockdown, a lot of manufacturers were also already experiencing some challenges due to macroeconomic environment that we are not friendly to them. So now let's go to the lockdown and impact on the manufacturing. During the lockdown, businesses were shut down and there was no operation of any kind. And then the manufacturing outfits are expected to maintain their workforce and at the same time keep the industry running. But it was a serious challenge to many of them because, like I said, before the lockdown, they have been having some negative impact from the COVID around the world. And then the lockdown now worsened the situation that we are yet to, you know, be able to analyze the impact in terms of monetary value, the loss in manufacturing sector. We are still collecting what our members faced in terms of the monetary value, you know, of what they experienced, the impact of lockdown. So once we are through with the survey, we'll release it to the public for the nation to know how much the quantum of naira or dollar that was lost by the manufacturing sector during the lockdown. But be that as it may, also we looking at it just in casually, you will agree with me that a lot of industries are yet to come back to life. You know, a lot of them. We are still collecting the number that are yet to resume operation, because the lockdown really knocked most of them off the business, and they couldn't compete, they couldn't come back. Some are still struggling to see how they can come back to operation.
Yeah, you spoke earlier on of the high cost of production before and during the lockdown. Is there a possibility that some of the manufacturing companies may have been permanently impacted, negatively impacted? Is there a possibility that some of these companies, some of these manufacturers may not be able to get out of this crisis?
Yes, there is possibility. It's not in doubt. It's not in doubt because a lot of them. I don't know how you can continue to pay your workers while you are not working. And then when you come back, especially those that have large number of workers in the floor manufacturing floor, where you are expected to adopt social distancing and physical distancing, and you're expected not to have more than 20 people in production floor. So when you consider that, you discover that many of them will not come back to operation except they introduce artificial intelligence or to be able to come back. So we are still doing a survey, collecting inputs from our members, and when we conclude the survey, we will release out the result to the public.
Let's look at your source of raw materials. You talked earlier on about not being able to get some raw materials, that is the ones that are import dependent, the ones that are brought from outside the country because of the closure of national boundaries and all of that. But for those that depend on their local raw materials, how did that impact their performance, their manufacturing, and all of that?
Yeah, they were also impacted because there was lockdown. There was no interstate movement for more than 3 months, and then the farmers cannot go to the farm because of so many issues, the restriction of movement, and also the insecurity in most of the areas that the farms are operating. So it's affecting both those that depends on imported and those that are getting it locally, except those that are stockpile raw materials. But how long will they continue to produce without seeking to bring more of the raw materials? So it has negatively impacted both those that depends on local, but with the easing out of the lockdown and interstate movement, I think those that depends largely on local raw materials are beginning to breathe air. But those that are depend on largely on importation are still going through a hell because the port is congested. We know the challenges with taking your consignment from the port. Not only that, the customs came with a new policy that changes the HA codes of most products. You used to be, for instance, you used to import your raw materials on this HS code at 5%. Suddenly, after completing your RA and the rest of them, to be able to now to pay for duty to take your consignment, custom will now come with a change in HS code and then an increase in duty. So you see many of them has the raw materials at the port that are yet to be cleared, and they are not intended to clear because the cost of clearing the raw materials is more than the cost of the raw materials. So it's really very bad for manufacturing that at a point we have been asking government to declare a state of emergency on manufacturing for it to continue to remain what it is, a job creation and wealth creation in the economy.
Okay, we will come very shortly to what you think government can do to help alleviate the situation for manufacturers. But it's obvious that these high cost of production, high cost of raw materials, and high cost of getting these raw materials that have been imported from the ports are added to the low purchasing power of the average consumer, is having adverse effects on the economy. there's no doubt that in the final analysis, if you are able to get your raw materials at a higher cost from the ports or sourced locally, the cost of the finished product will become unattainable for the average buyer. How is the Manufacturers Association going to deal with that?
Well, it's part of what we are bringing to government attention so that we can continue to support the sector. Yesterday we had a meeting with the Honorable Minister of Industry, Trade and Investment, who read out the stimulus packages that government has for the sector, and what government is intended to do for the sector to enable the sector come out from the high cost environment, and also to make the goods affordable for consumers. Well, we are waiting for the implementation. We are waiting for the bringing out those policies. It was laudable, most of the packages they have for manufacturers, but we are still expecting it to come out. Now, apart from that, we have written several positions to government to see how manufacturers can be incentivized so that they can reduce the cost of operation will be reduced, And let me appreciate the National Assembly for wading into the discourse earlier intention of doubling the cost of electricity. That has bring a little relief to the manufacturers. Now, the issue of customs, is major thing that we need to look at. The nation need to look at. If I have been importing these raw materials over 10 years in one HS code, and suddenly for customs to come and change my HS code and increase the duty, what does the custom want me to do? To still be in business or to shut down my plant? Knowing that I'm also competing with the products that comes from other clients that has efficient and effective post administration. So there are so many costs. We are not talking about funding, finance costs. Yes, the whole world was watched with central bank releasing intervention funds and there. But unfortunately, these intervention funds went to traders. Manufacturers did not access it. And that is what we are saying. How will we operate with the loans we got from commercial banks at 17, 18, 20% interest rate, when interest rate in other environment is less than 5%, some even a negative interest rate? How do we compete with the product coming from there? That's why we are pleading with government. We need to incentivize this sector for it to continue to create jobs, create wealth for the economy.
All right, Mr. Oruche, stay with us. Let me turn my attention to Dr. Bello, who is with us here in the studio. Of course, the relationship between the manufacturing sector and the agric sector. One of the compelling reasons why government decided to ease the lockdown was to strike a balance between lives and livelihoods. And the agric sector is a very critical aspect of our livelihoods in Nigeria. How much impact do you think the pandemic has had on the agric sector?
Thank you for having me, first of all. The impact is huge, and the need for more immediate interventions, as my colleague was talking about, is critical. Else we would face a very high risk of no food to eat if we do not implement the right measures. I believe this at the national level, at the state government level. Government is doing what they can, but this is the time for allowing the captains of the industry, whether in the production or processing or manufacturing sides, to take control of implementation. Enough of strategy. It is time to implement, and the private sector must drive this ship the way it ought to be, with government enabling. And to get to the smallholder farmers, to be sure that the land is ready and prepared for planting is critical. The financing element is critical. In short, look for political interventions, economic interventions, social interventions, as well as technological interventions. If we stay within this framework, call it pest integration, pest control integration. If we stay within the political, the economic, the social, and the technological, we can come out swinging. This is the time to bring the experts to the field, practitioners to the field, not theorists. If you haven't done it before, don't come into the room. Let's bring the folks who are doing it, who have done it before, to help mitigate the risk of COVID-19 to lives and livelihoods.
For several weeks of the lockdown, it was obvious that farmers did not get to their farms. So they could not prepare anything for the season, for the farming season.
Certainly,
and all of
certainly.
that. And that is expected to have a long-term effect on food production. In addition to that, is the security situation in certain parts of the country where people cannot venture out into their farms and feel safe within.
Absolutely. I think you asked the question earlier. During the lockdown, what did we see? I think I was in this studio to talk about the potential issues. We saw disruption in supply chain, which led to food spoilage. We saw chicken being transported from one state to the other, and they were stopped along the way. The day-old chicks perished. Fresh produce perished. Spoilage. There was shortage of food. The palliative measures did seem to work. It was great. However, production activities basically stopped. You could not, at that point in time during the lockdown, do your land clearing in some cases, couldn't do your land preparation. The supply of the inputs, the fertilizer, the herbicides were nowhere to be found. So activities basically came to a halt. Yes, there was exemption given. However, the corrupt system in terms of the tolls that security collected on the way stopped a lot of activities from taking place. So this is the time, now that these measures have been relaxed, this is the time that we must all work together in a blockchain format to be sure that land is being cleared, land preparation is happening, and I couldn't agree with my brother the more. Government intervention is critical, and let it be a strong public-private implementation. This is the key to success. We can get out of the bad situation.
The international charity organization Oxfam is warning that there could be famine in certain countries across the continent. And Nigeria is, a part of Nigeria is one of those places. And it's saying, Oxfam is saying, about 12,000 persons could die daily from hunger as a result of shortages in food production and supply.
Correct.
And as you and I know, parts of this country that are under security situation right now is included in that report. Just talking about the Northeast and some parts of the Northwest where banditry is on rampage and all of that. Now, what do you think can be done by governments, both in Nigeria and outside of Nigeria, to avert this kind of disaster?
Very well. Thank you so much. We have to think smart this time around. As consumers in Nigeria, a large percentage of Nigerians consume what we would call fresh produce. So we must mitigate the risk against spoilage and wastage of fresh produce, whatever we're able to produce. The second part is processing. Food processing, food manufacturing is the key to success. At this stage of our development as a nation, we must focus on new food product development. And this is not something that is afar off. I'll give you a practical example. We today have high quality cassava flour. The use of that is rather limited to swallow. What can we do today to transform the cassava flour into snacks, into pizza crust, into noodles and pasta? What can we do to be sure we have shawarma that is made from a... I see the huge opportunity for our farmers, for our small, medium enterprise and beverage industries in Nigeria. We have to think beyond post-harvest losses. The way to go is integrate the production with the process, the consumer. It is putting food on the land, and deaths indeed can result. But this can be averted.
Okay, let's turn our attention once more to Mr. Oruche, who is the Director General of the manufacturing sector in Nigeria, contributes well over 11% to Nigeria's GDP. And with this disruption by this pandemic of the manufacturing sector, it's obvious that it's going to affect the GDP figures at the end of this year and all of that. But let's look at what you think, what the manufacturing sector thinks the government can do in the immediate and medium and long term to cushion the impact on the sector.
Okay, thank you for that question. We have always prefer solutions, but the unfortunate thing is that most times the solutions we prefer do not get to the right portal for implementation. For the immediate, we suggested that all the regulatory agencies should be at the beat of their assignment. The Nigerian Customs Service and Nigerian Ports Authority should ensure that the raw materials already at the port should be, the consignment should be leased, without compromising the necessary thing they ought to do. There should be a fast track in taking away the raw materials imported by manufacturers. The manufacturers should be given a priority in terms of releasing their consignments. Secondly, the issue of international oil crisis has reduced the availability of forex in Nigeria. Manufacturers are crying because most of them cannot get forex to import the raw materials that will keep their machine running. We are asking for prioritization in forex allocation. Manufacturers should be given priority in allocating the limited forex we have. This way, we have done that before in 2016 when we have a recession. 2017, Central Bank came up with a sectoral prioritization of forex allocation, and the manufacturers were given priorities in terms of forex allocation. And we are pleading that the same be done now, so that those that are not able to import their raw materials could have access to forex raw materials to sustain their production and keep the job, keep the employment on. Then we also are pleading for government to see how they can give out bailout funds, not intervention funds that are being released but cannot even be accessed by manufacturers. We talk about bailout funds. It has happened in other climes where government will, give some funds as a grant to manufacturers, and for them to keep on running their job, their employment, to sustain the employment, to sustain production. We also are pleading on the short term, those that still have EEG, export expansion grant, still lying with the ministry, that they should be released, they should be paid. Export expansion grant were those that have exported based on government promise that once you export your product and bring back the proceeds, you are going to collect this grant. Till now, many of them are losing a lot of money in that aspect. So we are pleading for government to have a a second look at that issue, because many companies have folded and are about to fold because they can't access their export expansion grants. In the long run, we talked about infrastructure. Infrastructure is key to success in any business, both agriculture, manufacturing, hospitality business. Infrastructure is key. We believe that government alone cannot provide this infrastructure. The government need to partner with private sector. There must be a good, efficient strategy of PPP, private-public partnership, in provision of infrastructure, because
Well, Mr. Oruche, are you still with us there? It appears we're having some network. Okay. All right. We should be able to get Mr. Oruche back. He was making a very, very strong point there about public-private partnership, Dr. Bello. And you talked about that earlier on. Public-private partnership in ensuring that there is synergy in the economic development of the country, because it's not just a one-way thing.
Absolutely.
It has to be synergized amongst all sectors in the economy.
Absolutely.
And that applies to the agricultural sector too.
Very true, very true. And really, the nexus between production, processing, manufacturing, and the consumers, this is the bottom line. What is critical at this point, if I was to advise government, 3 key elements that we must provide. Financing is critical. 2, mechanization in the food and agricultural sector is critical. 3, processing and manufacturing. These are the critical elements. So let us together identify the anchor investors. The Manufacturing Association of Nigeria has a sector called the food and beverage sector. How do we leverage the powerhouse of the Manufacturing Association of Nigeria? Let us together identify the consumer foods, those that can leverage the local raw materials. That's number 1. And enable them with finance. The infrastructure, they've learned how to manage that. Enable them with logistics and supply chain, so that when the food gets to the consumer, it is available, but it is also affordable. Number 1. Number 2 is on the supply chain side, which is production. Let these anchor investors take it to scale. 10 states, 12 states, I don't know how many states it ought to be, but there are investors in every state who are doing food processing and food manufacturing. Let them provide the guaranteed market offtake to engage smallholder farmers. In a cooperative society setup, let it be under, take cassava. I am in love with cassava in one way or the other, because cassava really, for Africa, is the potatoes of the West. Let us apply the same science and technologies which we have used to transform potatoes in the West, transform cassava into edible processed consumer foods. Engage the smallholder farmers, engage the youth, engage the women. But we must provide financing, whether it is in the form of a grant or in the form of low-cost financing. Whatever that combination may be,
now
is the
that
key.
you have talked about financing, and I will start with this question, some manufacturers and agro-allied industries are already concerned that the loans that they obtained from banks are going to hurt them very much, given what has happened in the last couple of months. They've not been able to produced anything. They've not, and those loans are there,
Yes.
and the banks will soon be coming after them.
Yes.
How should they go about engaging with the banks
Very well. Very well.
to cushion the impact on them? Because some of them, particularly the manufacturers, are beginning to think that the banks will swoop on them very soon,
Yes.
and
Yes.
may paralyze their activities.
Absolutely. At this point, this is the last thing the manufacturers should be worrying about. I believe under a presidential order, we can stop and give some kind of a cushion, whether it's 6 months, 12 months, whatever the case may be. Put a moratorium on every loan that is currently due, and let the Central Bank of Nigeria manage with the money deposit banks to stop any further collection or payments, but instead let us leverage technology to ensure that grants that are given to help manage the issues of COVID-19 is used by those anchor investors in a prudent way.
Okay.
There should not be any leakages. This has been done before. 2012, 2016, 2015, the electronic wallet system for farmers can be deployed similarly to working with the food manufacturers, so that monies are going to what they are intended to bring to at the end of the day, to the consumer. So food prices would be affordable, it would be available, we would avert hunger in the land.
All right. Well, I'm happy that Mr. Ambrose Oruche is back on now. Mr. Oruche, very quickly, I need you to respond to this issue of the concern and worries being expressed by some of your members about the banks and your creditors who are likely to swoop on you very soon, particularly in this third quarter, to recover loans that they have given for your are you entering activities? Are you engaging them in any way? Are you engaging the banks and your creditors in any way?
Okay, that's part of what we have pleaded with government. Though central bank, though Mr. President in one of his broadcasts pleaded with BOI and government funds to give moratorium and then freezing the loans that we are taking from them. But commercial banks,
Well, again, we seem to be having network issues connecting with Mr. Ambrose Oruche. He is the Acting Director General, Manufacturers Association of Nigeria. He joined us via Skype. And here in the studio, we have Dr. Tony Bello, who is an agricultural expert. Let's quickly give you some news here. The Nigerian Center for Disease Control, NCDC, says is to establish a molecular laboratory in Nasarawa State. The Director General of the center, Dr. Chikwe Iyekwazu, announced this while on a visit to Nasarawa State.
Also commit to setting up an EOC in the new complex as soon as a room is identified, and actually not transfer the items in the existing room used as an EOC. So I say this is really a great opportunity to pool resources, pool expertise from the state, great investments from the little that we can bring from research institutions, the private sector, because the foundation is there on which we can all
be a believer of that. I want to start with the first step. Forget about how much it is that we need to develop that place. Let us go to one room in there and start something. If we start from that one room, somebody will come and support us for the second room and the third room. And then at the end of the day, we will have all the rooms filled up.
And the national chairman of the Joint Health Sector Unions, Bio Belemoye Josiah, has said that over 400 health workers have so far contracted the deadly coronavirus in Nigeria. He stated this at the start of the distribution of personal protective equipment to 36 states of the Federation, including the Federal Capital Territory.
Between the time that we got our index case to now, as of 3 days ago, about over 400 of our members that have been infected. Over 400. And it's still counting. So, Medical and Health Workers Union didn't wait to complain and have friction with government. Rather, they offer the hand of fellowship, a hand of cooperation and partnership by going ahead to provide what ordinarily people would have said, wait for government to do it. But we know it's a matter of life or death.
As you are aware, the COVID-19 has affected the economy drastically. Therefore, the government, much as it will want to, cannot provide everything that is needed in our health system. That is why interventions like the one that we are witnessing today is very, very important.
And the World Health Organization, WHO, says there is a danger of the COVID-19 overwhelming Africa's health systems, and that this is escalating by the day. Up until now, the continent has largely been spared the worst of the global pandemic, but WHO directors say things may change after several countries eased lockdown measures. Right, and the United States top infectious diseases expert, Dr. Anthony Fauci, is hopeful of having the COVID-19 vaccine by the end of the year. By the end of this year. In a interview on Thursday, Fauci expressed cautious optimism about various vaccines that are currently in different stages of development. All right, these are the news updates for now. We would like to thank Dr. Tony Bello, who is an agric expert, joining us here this morning. On a final note, just before we go, what do you see as the future for the agricultural sector if and when this pandemic continues for much longer than it is at the moment?
It's simple. Just to remember what it would be, it's called pest control. The political is the presidency, really. Ministers, state governance, and the legislation. The economic is the private sector. The Food and Beverage Manufacturers Association of Nigeria.